Okay, here we are. I think we're now live in this room. Give us a wave in chat if you are hearing me and seeing us all move. There should be 4 of us on screen. So this is going to be a panel session. So we've got some esteemed guests. I'm excited to hear from each of them. And we're going to be talking about the state of enterprise WordPress. WordPress is 21 years old. It's still evolving pretty rapidly. As we've just been seeing with all this AI and site editing work. The site editor in particular starting to be adopted by enterprise, and we're really seeing that anyway at Human Made. We've also got collaborative editing coming soon as we get into the meat of phase 3, and even native multilingual after that with phase 4. And a stat I saw from the State of Enterprise WordPress report, which folks may have already seen. You can go and check that out if not. 75% of organizations rate WordPress's return on investment as good or excellent and plan to stick with it for the long term. And so that's like a great foundation. More broadly, I think it's also like a great time for open source more generally. We're seeing the open source AI movement, I think, introduce more enterprise companies to the concept of open source. And the core benefits of open source are also just starting to be, or I think actually now are just much more accepted within kind of enterprise IT. One of my favorite stats is from Red Hat's annual State of Enterprise Open Source. And that's that nearly 90% of IT leaders, 89% they say, see enterprise open source as more secure or as secure as proprietary software, which those of us who've been in open source or WordPress for a long time have seen that shift. So anyway, enough from me. We're going to dig into all of that and more. I'm joined by Drew Broomhall, the Chief Product Officer at Link Media, which is one of their publications is AGBI, and we just saw a little showcase of some cool AI stuff. We've also got Alain Schlesser, the Principal Architect at Yoast, and Steve Jones, CTO of Equalize Digital. So I'm going to dive right in with a question for you, Drew. And I'll ask you just at the beginning of the question, give us a bit of a background and explain a little bit of your background as it's relevant to what we're talking about today. But as someone who's in product at a fast-growing media company that's chosen WordPress, how do you think about the platform's strengths and weaknesses when it comes to supporting like large-scale, agile content and publishing teams and workflows and kind of the needs that you have?
Yeah, sure. So hello, everyone. My name's Drew. I've been in online publishing slightly longer than WordPress has been around. I think it's 23 years now. I started out as a journalist and website editor, then started specializing in SEO for media businesses, ended up running search for a lot of very, very large websites with millions of pages of content, and then sort of pivoted into audience development, and then sort of eventually into what I'm doing now, which is sort of product and technology for media businesses. So in terms of kind of what I'm looking for in terms of enterprise scale publishing, I would say I kind of look at scale in a couple of ways. Can we support the editorial team trying to do what they're trying to do, which means can we provide them the workflows, the custom workflows that they need to be productive? Can we provide them the tools that allow them to do the job? In which case, WordPress is a good choice for that because of the customization options that are available to design custom workflows and make sure that it's tuned to do exactly what the editorial team want it to do. I guess then you can then look at what are we trying to publish? How much are we trying to publish? What quantity of content we're publishing, and importantly, how much traffic are we actually kind of trying to deliver, and what performance do we actually want to try and get out of the platform? And there, I think WordPress has made some pretty good strides in becoming just a naturally more performant platform than it was many years ago, and you can get a pretty good level of performance out of a fairly small amount of hardware, which is a definite plus for small media businesses like ourselves that don't want to spend a huge amount. and it allows you to get things out pretty quickly. So yeah, that's,
Thanks. Alain, maybe I'll come to you next as someone who's been like deep in the architecture of WordPress for quite a long time. I wonder whether you could speak a little bit to that journey that WordPress has been on and the improvements, some of the improvements Drew was talking about there in terms of really making sure that WordPress is able to scale to meet those like content needs of organizations, maybe have a lot of people in working on the content, maybe have complex workflows.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, hi everyone. I'm principal architect with Yoast. I'm generally very involved in WordPress and open source in general. And as Tom mentioned, I've done my fair share of core contributions as well, peeked behind the curtain. So what I've seen is that there's more of a focus on enabling customizations to the core of the editorial workflow, where it really matters. So what Drew mentioned with the editorial workflow really being at the center of the attention of building a new site, I think that is the main problem to solve for any scalable solution, because you don't only need to scale it in terms of performance so that it technically runs, but you also need to scale it across teams and across corporate structures and so on. So what I've seen is that there's a pronounced focus on making this editorial scalability work, and then there's teams like the performance team that make sure that once you've built a solution that actually fits the editorial requirements, that you also then have all sorts of automatic performance gains that are being done for you behind the scenes. And there has been an accelerating trend towards getting better and better front-end performance. So for the actual visitor opening the website in the browser, there's a noticeable improvement between major versions of WordPress already. And this is happening at a scale where this can be measured at the internet level, where we actually notice that the internet in general is getting faster and more performant because of the changes in WordPress.
Wow. That's a pretty incredible thing to be able to measure and to say. Steve, I'd love to come to you next and step a little bit back from content. I think something that's becoming increasingly important to enterprise and public sector, where we're seeing WordPress growth, is the broader regulatory and compliance landscape. And so I'd love for you to just share a little bit about your background there, because I know that that's something that you really specialize in. And then I think if you could talk a little bit about that landscape and how that's likely to be impacting enterprise companies who are choosing WordPress over the next couple of years.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here. A little bit of background on myself. I'm the CTO of Equalize Digital. We focus on making WordPress more accessible for enterprise, government, and higher education organizations. We built the Accessibility Checker plugin to help automate and maintain accessibility compliance. I've been working in WordPress for over 15 years and have contributed accessibility fixes to WordPress core releases.
Wow.
As far as regulation, I think we're at a turning point where accessibility is no longer just a best practice. It's a legal requirement in many industries, with regulations like the Americans with Disabilities Act increasingly being applied to digital spaces, the European Accessibility Act coming into force later this year, and updates to Section 508 in the US. Enterprise companies can no longer afford to ignore accessibility or treat it as an afterthought, as we've seen several lawsuits across a wide range of industries. For enterprise companies that are looking to get this right, and in our limited time here, I want to just focus on 3 key areas that I think would be good to focus on. One, governance and accountability. Assign responsibility. If accessibility is everybody's job, it's nobody's job. Define clear ownership over accessibility, document training, and make policies in those regards. 2, automation and testing. While the accessibility checker plugin is an automated tool and can catch a lot and can help you accelerate your accessibility compliance, manual testing and user testing is still required. And finally, procurement and third-party integrations. So accessibility isn't just about what we build. It's also about the themes, the plugins, the third-party software that we integrate into our projects. With procurement policies that consider accessibility, there is a defined standard level of compliance for software that we introduce into our projects. So ultimately, accessibility should be a core part of the digital strategy. It reduces legal risk, it improves user experience, and produces better engagement and business outcomes.
Actually, a question that I saw come up at a recent WordPress meetup I was at, where someone delivered an accessibility talk, was around user testing, and so I think the person didn't really get a question there, so maybe I'll just re-ask it here. Do you have any tips or signposting for how people can approach like user testing if that's not something they've done before? Because that's something I do hear come up. I really would love to. It's one thing to use these automated tests, but they don't necessarily catch everything. But how do I go about finding user tests? So, are there organizations that you could signpost to that offer that?
Yeah. So you can partner with accessibility companies such as Equalize Digital, but there are many companies out there, cool. not just to promote ourselves, but where we can help facilitate that user testing, and we can help put together those the user test stories on what types of audiences need to be tested, whether it's fully blind users, users with different kinds of assisted technologies. And you could put that together, and then we could do the user testing and provide those reports back. You can also look at doing that in-house, reaching out to local industries that have blind users, and trying to hire them to come in and do user testing. They don't always necessarily have to be technical, but we want to be respectful of these people and provide this as a freelance opportunity for them. Bring them in, have them test it, pay them a fair wage to do so.
Very cool, thank you. Okay, well that's useful to know. I'll offer that as an answer next time at a WordPress meetup and see that asked. Drew, maybe I come to you next as someone who's making these kinds of product decisions. I'd love to hear a bit about how you think about prioritizing, the accessibility, performance, SEO. That sometimes these can feel like competing priorities. I think we have a sense sometimes in the industry you'll hear people who work agency or platform side saying, "God, I wish clients cared about this more," or something. How do you think about the regulatory environment and like balancing those priorities as you're approaching your product decisions?
Yeah, I'm not sure I really see them as competing priorities. I mean, ultimately, accessibility, as Steve points out, you have a legal responsibility in virtually any sector now to make your website compliant. So it's really you've just got to do that and make sure you dedicate time to it. Do businesses always do that and prioritize it? Probably not, but I think gradually as people become more understanding of the regulations, I think people do take it seriously. I think performance and SEO have converged to a point where you can't really separate the two. And SEO teams end up now actually being a primary driver of and sponsor of performance improvements, and end up actually really challenging their DevOps teams to really maximize performance on sites. And this is something that I hear from SEOs in large and small publishers. So yeah, I don't think there really is a convergence. I think Google introducing Core Web Vitals was probably the critical thing that brought all that together, because all of a sudden there was this relationship between supposed search engine performance and little marginal gain that you might get, and ensuring that your platform was fast. And I think that has really brought it together, and it's also given you a very obvious visual indicator which the whole business can get around to be able to visually measure the improvement of the user experience.
Okay, that's great to hear. Yeah, I mean, not that these things aren't competing for priority. I think that's progress probably in the industry as well, that we've managed to get to the point where those things are not competing so much for budget and time. Okay, I'd like to, I think, step back a little bit from that. I think another thing that came through really clearly in the State of Enterprise WordPress report, and also is the topic of discussion when I'm talking to other CMS vendors and providers, is this rise of headless and composable as a trend. We've kind of gone from these traditional CMSs through this DXP era. Now we're hearing a lot about composable. Alain, maybe I'd come to you first. I think we'd be really interested to hear your kind of architectural take on maybe what those, maybe you can help us just sort out what some of that actually means, and then relate that back to WordPress, because I think, are probably not used to thinking of WordPress using these industry terms, but actually we find that the WordPress does have things that speak to some of those terms.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, WordPress is, according to current definitions, considered a hybrid CMS, a hybrid between a traditional CMS, which basically means that everything happens on the server, and the server puts out the content to your browser in some way, and a headless CMS, which allows you to decouple the server from the front end that the visitor actually sees. So that if you consider a WordPress theme, traditionally that is, the theme generates the output for the browser on the server side and sends it to the browser, whereas a headless approach would be that the browser never contacts the server. It just sees that front end, and the front end makes REST API requests to the WordPress backend to fetch the content and display it in a way that is decoupled from the actual WordPress server. And so WordPress is considered a hybrid CMS because it can actually offer both of these approaches. Composable has been a more recent term, which means everything and nothing, basically. It just means that you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, basically. And that is generally good business advice. More specifically, in terms of a tech stack, it means that you have more dedicated modular systems for parts of your entire web presence, basically. So you might have your WordPress site that is serving your landing pages. You might have a dedicated e-commerce solution for your shop, and so on and so forth. And so composable, depending on what granularity, it can be very small system, very big system. So basically it means that you try to manage risk as best as you can. And so as an architect, my role is basically to understand the risk, understand the requirements, and the expected lifespan of a project, and then come up with a way of properly managing the risk across that entire lifespan of the project. So for a quick marketing landing page, you don't need to care too much. You can just pull it up in whatever you can come up with, because you don't need to live with the consequences of your decision 20 years down the road. And usually in the enterprise space, you make more longer-term decisions, and that makes everything a bit harder. And that's why something like a hybrid CMS like WordPress is so interesting, because you can basically mix and match as needed and just split your larger project into smaller projects and optimize the solutions for those smaller project spaces, so that you get more of the benefits and less of the drawbacks. Because in the end, everything is a trade-off. And if you can split everything up into multiple decisions, you can optimize those decisions for the different parts. So as an architect, I really would encourage everyone to consider this entire equation that you want to solve as, how can I best manage my risk? Because there will not be any guarantees, but you can do the best to understand and mitigate the long-term risks and make sure that you have the best chance of having a successful project delivery and having a project that is viable and sustainable throughout its entire lifespan.
Making these long-term decisions. Drew, I'm going to come to you in a minute because I'd love to get your how you're thinking about that decision point that I think a lot of like product leaders are faced with. But Steve, first of all, I think if people are choosing these headless or these decoupled approaches, I think it'd be useful actually to understand whether there are specific accessibility considerations that come into play there. So maybe you could speak a little bit to that.
Sure. Yeah, headless absolutely introduces an additional level of complexity for accessibility, whereas like your traditional WordPress theme actually kind of should come with semantic HTML and WordPress best practices out of the box. Headless setups require building front ends from scratch in JavaScript using frameworks like React and Vue. So accessibility is no longer a given at that point, and it must be intentionally implemented. Sure, there's a lot of stuff with frameworks that kind of help this along, but you really need to make considerations for HTML semantics because, I mean, it's a kind of a blank canvas that you can kind of do anything on. And you need to make considerations for keyboard functionality and dynamically loaded content, which, these front-end frameworks, that's pretty much what they do is they just manipulate parts of the DOM in and out. And that's kind of without announcing that to a screen reader, like the screen reader really doesn't, or the screen reader user has no context to what's happening on that single page application. So you have to make lots of considerations for accessibility when using these front-end frameworks.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's kind of reflective, a little bit of what you were touching on actually, Alain, that if you're going to decide to do something decoupled, you're really taking much more responsibility for then building everything that you no longer are going to get as part of the as part of like a hybrid or traditional system, which maybe that's a good thing and you're excited by that extra responsibility and the flexibility that's going to give you, but more often than not, I think what we see actually are people not realizing that and then perhaps bring surprise down the road when they're missing some of those things that maybe you take for granted. Drew, anyway, how did you approach making this decision for AGBI? How do you think about this headless? I mean, in the industry, we kind of think of headless and non-headless as if they're two sides of the industry. Does that even matter so much to you? How do you think about that?
I think there are three questions you need to ask yourself about the product that you are going to be shipping and your users are going to be engaging with. So the first one is, how static or dynamic does my platform need to be? Because if you're going down a very static route where everybody is seeing exactly the same thing, then you don't necessarily need the gains that you might be getting from a JavaScript framework. Then sort of related to that is content freshness. So how much am I going to be publishing? How often are my pages going to be changing? Because again, that has implications on things like caching strategy. If you're not changing much, if it's very static landing pages, they can just sit there in cache for a long, long time. And again, you don't really need to do anything. Whereas if you're publishing really up to the minute, lots of news coming out, then you might want to be making some changes. And the final one would then be, am I relying just on content from my CMS, or does the product that I build use data from other APIs? Am I using other services? So, for example, at my last company, I built a business intelligence platform, which had a mobile app, a website app, and also integrated data into a CMS. And it was using editorial content and a very, very complex database. It made sense to run everything completely headless in that context because it gave us the flexibility to be able to pull together all the APIs, and it was a very, very dynamic experience. I think what you're seeing now, the statistics were saying that people are moving away from headless. I think what's happened is a lot of publishers, particularly publishers, got very excited about the idea of headless, ended up building these solutions, discovered that actually they're far more complex when it comes to making SEO work, getting Googlebot to index them. Even things like getting your analytics working are that much harder. And they've realized that actually they don't need that functionality, and they can do perfectly well with, just static site generation based on a hybrid approach. So I think that's where the retrenchment is coming from.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it has been somewhat heartening to see, I think, us go through that cycle as an industry. And although there is still quite a lot of interest, it feels like, that it's maturing a little bit in terms of understanding, okay, where's it's a good fit, and actually where is it a bit unnecessary. And we're seeing this trend where kind of all the players, whether they were pure headless or traditional, are all starting to add each other's features, and so there's this little bit of a kind of meeting in the middle happening, which is interesting. Alrighty, gosh, we're already 25 minutes in, so I think we're doing pretty well. We've kept the session tight. 30 minutes isn't long for a 4-person panel, I'm discovering. So I think we could wrap up with a bit of a lightning round. And so I think I could ask each of you to give me a kind of major trend that you're seeing, and give us a little sense of a hint of how you think that's going to impact WordPress, and maybe what you'd like to see from either the product or the platform, or kind of the broader ecosystem. Steve, maybe I'll come to you first on that. I'll give you the you can get the easy one out of the way then.
Yeah.
And, make the other two think a bit harder.
There you go. So what I'd like to see from the ecosystem is just more continued standardization. Accessibility, security, compliance is often left to individual agencies and site owners to figure out. If we build WordPress core hosting environments, or hosting providers and plugin developers build compliance first software, I think it's going to be so much easier for enterprise companies to have a smoother path to adoption.
Very cool. I mean, I wonder just already off the top of my head whether there could be more collaboration between peers in the space, even competitors in the space, to just kind of work together and raise the bar for everyone on that. Love it. Alain, I'm going to come to you next.
So what we've seen already as a paradigm shift that has started due to the rise of AI agents and LLMs is that more and more of your content will be consumed by machines as the first point of contact instead of humans. So that makes things like information architecture and structural control much more important. And I hope that WordPress will add the necessary features in the editorial workflow so that you can actually manage the site as a whole in terms of how it can be paused and navigated as well. By the way, accessibility is a big part of that, because also everything that is accessible is usually easier to pause by LLMs and be forwarded to the user's agent. And I personally hope that WordPress will take its role as market leader serious and use its critical mass to help emerge new standards and new protocols to drive this paradigm shift into the right direction.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, Drew, you can close us out with your trend and perhaps what you're hoping to see from WordPress.
Well, seeing as Sam did a great job of sneak previewing our beta AI product, it would be remiss of me not to talk about AI. A couple of things I want to talk about. The first one is something that Noel didn't cover, which is the idea of sort of AI coding, and kind of being able to build things without that much technical expertise. I'm fascinated by products like Lovable and 10Web. The latter in particular is fascinating. You can spin up a WordPress site just by giving it prompts with all the security taken care of, hosting taken care of, performance, all of that up and running. That's obviously going to have an impact at the lower end, one-person band and small agency end of WordPress to begin with. But where I'm looking at it as a product leader is does that open up opportunities for us to be able to ship things faster, especially when we start taking into account the kind of things that the team are showing around the block editor and the changes that WordPress is making in being able to kind of build things with much less involvement from developers. Perhaps the next step is to actually be able to allow product owners to really command that with even less sort of technical input and get things out faster. And then secondly, and I think LLMs are making their way into WordPress via plugins. Yoast, for example, you can get it to generate page titles and meta descriptions for you. That's great. I think looking at ways of more natively bringing that in, so that we can start using LLMs for slightly more complex tasks. I've got an editorial team that's already asking me for new AI features. Already coming to me saying, "What about this? What about that?" Some quite complex things beginning to bubble up. So I think thinking about how we get that integrated more tightly is going to be a real key thing over the next couple of years.
Very cool. Yeah, I feel like this is going to be the year where we're going to see the rubber hit the road with a bunch of that stuff. Last year was more experimental. I think that's really cool. Okay, folks, I think we'll wrap the panel there. I hope everyone who's been listening along has enjoyed it. Thank you very much, Drew, Steve, and Alain, for sharing your significant experience and your time with everyone here. I am going to press end on the broadcast here, and then I'll hop over to the other room for everyone watching and pull everyone over there. And we're going to have our closing session, which I think is going to segue perfectly from some of the discussions we've had here. We've been talking about what we might wish for the future of WordPress. Mary Hubbard, the executive director of WordPress, is going to outline how she's thinking about the future of WordPress. And so let's get on with that.